The stars above were cold and distant as the alien refugees drifted through the vast emptiness of space. Their home planet, once a peaceful world, had been ravaged by an overwhelming invasion. It had happened so fast, too fast for the inhabitants to react. Entire cities were swallowed by war machines, and the peaceful population was scattered like dust in the wind. What remained were the few who managed to escape. The lucky ones who had found their way onto an old transport ship, barely held together by the desperate will of its passengers. Among them was Zyla, a young warrior from a planet once known for its beauty and intelligence. She looked out from the small window of the ship, her eyes tracing the streaks of light from distant stars, but her mind was far away, back on the world she had left behind. Memories of her home, her family, and the friends who didn't survive weighed heavily on her heart. She could still hear their voices echoing in her mind, begging for help as the invaders came crashing down on their peaceful existence. There had been no time to mourn. There was only the ship and its broken crew. Zilla was not alone. Around her sat a dozen other refugees, all from different planets, all survivors of their own personal nightmares. There was Yurak, a tall, green-skinned alien with 4 arms, who had lost his family when their planet was obliterated by a ruthless fleet. Then there was Lyra, a small, silver-skinned alien with large, glowing eyes, who had watched as her city crumbled to dust. And there was Torma, an elderly scientist who had spent his life studying the stars and the mysteries of the universe, now looking at the stars with sadness rather than wonder. They had all lost everything, and the only thing that kept them going was the hope of finding a new home, a place where they could rebuild, live in peace, and maybe, just maybe, heal the wounds of their broken worlds. But as the days stretched into weeks, and the weeks stretched into months, hope began to fade. The ship, once a symbol of escape, was now a fragile shell floating aimlessly in the cold void. Fuel was running low. Supplies were almost gone. Their ship was old, its systems failing, and there was no way to communicate with anyone. They had no idea where they were or if anyone could hear their distress signal. The only thing they knew was that they were drifting toward a planet they had never heard of, but that might offer a chance for survival. Zilla stood near the control panel, staring at the faint outline of the blue planet that appeared on the distant horizon. Earth. She had heard of it. A small world teeming with life, but never thought it would be a place they would ever reach. The planet had been a subject of curiosity for some, a mysterious world known for its humans, who were seen as primitive by many alien cultures. But to the refugees, Earth was their last chance. It was a place they could seek refuge, where they might find safety and shelter. However, doubt still lingered. Zyla had heard whispers among her fellow refugees. What if Earth refused them? What if humanity turned them away? After all, the human race had been known for their conflicts, their wars, and their history of isolation. Would they be welcomed as survivors or feared as invaders? A loud alarm suddenly blared, breaking Zilla from her thoughts. She turned to see Torma, the scientist, frantically pressing buttons on the control panel. The ship shook violently, and the lights flickered as a warning flashed on the screen. "Something's wrong," Torma shouted. "We're losing power. We're coming in too fast. We won't be able to land safely." Panic spread among the group. Yurak growled in frustration, his 4 arms gripping the sides of his seat as the ship jolted once more. Lyra's glowing eyes were wide with fear, and even the usually calm Zyla felt a surge of panic rising in her chest. "We have to slow down," Zyla said, moving toward Torma. "What do we do?" The elderly scientist worked quickly, tapping buttons with shaking hands. I can try to send a distress signal, but it's a long shot. We might crash before we get a response." Zyla's heart pounded. Earth was so close, yet so far. They were on the edge of hope and despair, with nothing but the strength of their will to carry them forward. "We don't have time to wait for help," Zyla said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "If Earth is our last hope, then we will land there, by any means necessary. Prepare for impact." The refugees held on tightly as the ship descended toward the unknown planet. As they neared Earth's atmosphere, the ship began to burn up, its shields barely holding together. Zyla's mind raced. She thought of her lost world, of the future they had hoped for, and of the fragile hope that now rested in the hands of strangers on a distant world. The ship plummeted toward the surface of Earth. The future of the refugees, and perhaps the fate of their species, was uncertain. Would they find kindness, or would they be left to perish in the unknown? Only time would tell. The crash landing was violent, shaking the small ship until it came to a rough stop on the Earth's surface. The refugees inside were thrown from their seats, bruised but alive. Zyla gripped the side of her chair, her heart pounding in her chest. The alarms had stopped blaring, but the ship was badly damaged, smoke swirling around the cabin. Through the broken window, Zyla could see the sky of Earth, blue and clear. They had made it. But now, they were faced with a new challenge. They had no idea where they had landed, or if anyone had even seen them crash. Were they alone, stranded in an unknown world, or would the humans they had hoped to find help from show up soon? "Is everyone okay?" Zyla called out, her voice strained but filled with determination. The others groaned and stirred, slowly getting back to their feet. Torma, the elderly scientist, was the first to speak. His glasses were cracked, but he still tried to adjust them, looking around with concern. "We've landed, but I fear our ship is no longer in flying condition. We are at the mercy of this planet." Lyra, the small, silver-skinned alien, had a deep cut across her arm, but seemed to be more worried about the others. "We need help. Do we wait here or go out there?" Zyla nodded, her mind racing. "We wait. We'll see if anyone comes to us." As the minutes turned into hours, the refugees rested in the damaged ship, too afraid to venture outside just yet. The ship was deep in a forest, hidden from the view of any passing humans. Zyla thought about their next move, hoping Earth would not reject them the way other planets had. But the longer they stayed inside, the more anxious they became. What if help never came? Then a soft noise broke the silence, the sound of footsteps, distant but growing closer. Zyla's heart leaped in her chest. Could it be a human? Or was it something else? An animal, or perhaps an enemy? She signaled to the others to stay quiet. The refugees pressed themselves into the shadows, hiding within the damaged ship. Through a crack in the door, Zyla peered outside, her breath catching in her throat. A group of humans appeared in the clearing, led by a woman who seemed determined and focused. She was dressed in simple clothing, with short dark hair and glasses perched on the edge of her nose. She carried a small device that beeped and clicked, scanning the area as she moved forward, her eyes scanning the surroundings. Behind her, several soldiers kept watch, their eyes scanning the forest for any signs of danger. Zyla's hand tightened around the ship's door handle. This was it, the moment of truth. The humans were here. The woman, Dr. Elena Mendez, approached the wreckage of the ship cautiously, her face a mask of curiosity and caution. She paused when she saw the alien markings on the ship's hull and the strange damaged structure. But her gaze softened when she noticed the faint signs of life inside. She looked back at the soldiers, her eyes communicating a silent understanding that this wasn't a threat. "Stay alert," she ordered, before turning back to the ship. "This might be what we've been waiting for." Zyla's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know whether to trust these humans, but there was something in their leader's eyes, a kind of warmth, that made her believe they weren't here to harm them. She motioned for the others to stay hidden as Dr. Mendez carefully approached the ship's entrance. There was a moment of silence before she spoke. "Hello." Dr. Mendez's voice was calm, gentle, and the refugees could hear the uncertainty in her tone. "We mean no harm. Are you alive?" Zyla's heart raced. It was clear the humans had no idea who, or what, they were dealing with. But this was the moment, the one they had been waiting for. With a deep breath, Zyla stepped forward, carefully opening the door to the ship. The humans tensed, But Dr. Mendez's expression softened when she saw Zilla step out first. The alien warrior was cautious but appeared unarmed. She was tall, her skin a dark shade of purple, and her eyes glowed softly in the dim light of the forest. Her posture was strong, but there was a vulnerability in her gaze that seemed to speak volumes. "Hello," Zilla said, her voice steady but quiet. "We come in peace." Dr. Mendez stared at her for a moment, taking in her words. She had heard stories of aliens, of far-off planets, and strange creatures, but this was the first time she was face to face with one. Her mind raced, but she held her ground, trying to hide the shock that flashed across her face. "We're here to help," Dr. Mendez said, her voice soft. She stepped forward slowly, her hand outstretched in a gesture of peace. "You're safe now. We can help you." Zilla looked at her hand, uncertain but sensing the sincerity in Dr. Mendez's eyes. Slowly, she took a step forward and accepted the gesture, her hand meeting the human's. It was the first step toward something new, a chance to survive and to begin again, in a strange new world where they were no longer enemies but potential allies. The soldiers behind Dr. Mendez were still wary, watching the alien refugees carefully. But as Zilla stepped forward, they lowered their weapons, trusting their leader's judgment. The tension in the air began to ease, and for the first time since their escape, the refugees felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they had found a new home. Dr. Mendez turned to her team. "Get them to the medical bay. Let's make sure they're okay." Zilla nodded, her heart swelling with cautious relief. They had made the first step toward safety, and this time, it was humanity's kindness that offered them a chance to heal. The refugees were carefully guided away from the wrecked ship, their eyes scanning the strange world around them as they followed Dr. Mendez and her team. The forest was quiet, except for the sound of their footsteps crunching on the leaves beneath them. The air smelled fresh, and the bright sunlight filtered through the trees, casting soft patterns on the ground. Zilla couldn't help but feel a mix of awe and wariness as they walked. This planet, Earth, was unlike anything she had ever known. Its beauty was undeniable, but it was also foreign, alien in its own way. As they approached a small settlement, the refugees saw humans moving about, carrying out their daily tasks. Some were farmers, tending to crops, while others worked with machines, fixing tools and building structures. The humans seemed ordinary, yet there was something striking about them. Zilla had heard stories, of course, but seeing them in person was different. Dr. Mendez led them into a large building, where the refugees were given medical attention. The room smelled of clean, fresh air, and the soft hum of machines filled the space. The humans who tended to them were kind, asking questions about their injuries, their homes, and their journey. Zilla was grateful for the gentle care, though she couldn't shake the feeling that the humans were watching them closely, perhaps unsure of what to make of their unexpected visitors. Torma, the elderly scientist, was the first to speak with Dr. Mendez about their home planet. His voice was calm, though he appeared exhausted. "We are refugees from the planet Zoran," he explained. "Our world was attacked by invaders. We had no choice but to flee." Dr. Mendez listened intently, her brow furrowed with concern. "I'm sorry for what happened to your world. You're safe here. We'll help you, however we can." Lyra, still recovering from her injuries, smiled faintly. "Thank you. We didn't expect this. We thought we would be rejected, like we were on other planets." Dr. Mendez shook her head. "We don't reject those who are in need. We're all just people trying to survive." Zilla stepped forward, her eyes meeting Dr. Mendez's. "Thank you for your kindness. But we are strangers here. How can we repay you for this?" The human scientist gave a soft smile, placing a hand on Zilla's shoulder. "You don't need to repay us. We do this because it's the right thing to do. But we may need your help in the future. As you said, we're strangers to one another." Zilla nodded, understanding. She knew that trust had to be earned, and they would have to work together to build that trust. But for now, they were safe. For now, they had a roof over their heads, food, and medical care. And that was more than they could have ever hoped for. As the hours passed, the refugees began to relax. Their initial fear and confusion slowly began to fade, replaced by a sense of cautious optimism. The humans were kind, but they were still uncertain. Zyla could feel it in the air. There was something unspoken between them, a hesitation. The humans wanted to help, but they were wary of the unknown. Dr. Mendez walked into the room where the refugees were gathered, her face serious. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice low. "We're not the only ones here. There are other humans, other groups, who might not be as welcoming as we are." Zyla's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "There are factions on Earth," Dr. Mendez explained. "Not everyone believes in helping others, especially those who come from outside this world. Some people view aliens as a threat, and they might not be as kind as we've been." The room fell silent. The weight of Dr. Mendez's words settled heavily on the refugees. They had escaped one danger only to face another, this time from the humans they had hoped would offer them sanctuary. Iraq, the towering four-armed warrior, growled under his breath. "We didn't come all this way just to be hunted again." "We understand," Dr. Mendez said quickly. "That's why we're doing everything we can to keep you safe. But I need you to be cautious. The world you're in now is complicated. There are people who will see you as an enemy, and there are people who will see you as a threat." Zela stood up, her posture strong. "We understand. We won't cause trouble. We just want peace. But if anyone tries to harm us, we will protect you." Dr. Mendez said firmly, her eyes meeting Zyla's. "We'll do everything in our power to make sure no one harms you." The conversation left the refugees with a sense of unease. They had hoped for safety, but now they knew that their journey was far from over. They were strangers on a strange world, and the future was uncertain. But they had each other, and they had the chance to start over. They would make this new world their home, just as long as they could keep their peace. As the day ended, Zyla stood by the window of the small room where she and the others had been placed. She looked out at the sky, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Earth was a beautiful world, but she couldn't forget the dangers that still loomed, dangers that might come from the very people who had taken them in. But for now, they were safe, and that was enough. For now, they could rest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but they would face them together. They had survived the worst, and now they would fight to build a future among the stars. The days that followed brought a sense of normalcy, but it was clear that the road to true peace would not be easy. The refugees had settled into their new lives on Earth, but every day brought new challenges. Zyla and the others tried to adapt to the human ways, learning their language, understanding their customs, and figuring out how to contribute. They were all eager to make themselves useful, but it was difficult. Earth was so different from Zorin, their home planet. The humans had their own ways of doing things, and many of the refugees felt like outsiders. Zila, however, was determined. She wanted to prove that they weren't just visitors. They were survivors. They had been through so much, and now they had to find a place for themselves in this strange world. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about building a future. She spent her days helping Dr. Mendez and the others with various tasks, from repairing small machines to offering her knowledge of space travel. The humans, in turn, began to show more trust, gradually letting the refugees take on more responsibility. But there was still an unease in the air. Dr. Mendez had warned them about the factions on Earth that didn't believe in helping aliens, and Zilla could feel the tension growing. Not everyone was as welcoming as the group that had helped them. There were whispers among the human population, and Zilla had heard some of them. The rumors, the fear, the talk of alien invaders. Despite the kindness they had received, there was a sense of caution, as if the humans were waiting for something to go wrong. One evening, as Zilla walked through the settlement, she overheard a conversation that made her stop in her tracks. Two humans were talking in hushed tones near the edge of the settlement, away from the others. They should never have been allowed in, one of them said, his voice low but filled with anger. Aliens are a threat. We should be preparing for an invasion, not helping them. Don't be foolish, the other replied. Not all of them are a threat. We've seen how peaceful they are. These refugees are just trying to survive. Zyla felt a chill run down her spine as she listened to the conversation. It was clear that not everyone on Earth saw them as friends. She couldn't shake the feeling that the peaceful life they had been building was fragile, and that there were forces working against them. She continued her walk, her mind racing with thoughts of what she had heard. How could they stay safe if there were people who saw them as enemies? And what would happen if these factions began to gain power? Zyla had always been a fighter, but even she knew that there were limits to what they could do if the humans turned against them. Later that night, as Zyla sat in a small room, she discussed her concerns with Torma. The elderly scientist had been quiet for the past few days, his eyes filled with a sadness that Zyla couldn't quite place. They are afraid, Torma said, his voice soft but filled with an ancient wisdom. Fear is a powerful thing. It clouds judgment and makes people do things they wouldn't normally do. Zyla nodded, understanding his words. She had seen it before, on other worlds. Fear turning neighbors against each other, destroying trust and hope. She had hoped Earth would be different, that the kindness they had experienced would overcome the fear. But it was clear that Earth's problems were far from over. The next morning, Dr. Mendez called for a meeting with the refugees. Zyla joined the others in the small conference room, where the human scientist stood at the front, her expression serious. I've been hearing troubling reports, Dr. Mendez began, her tone firm. There are some people on Earth who are growing fearful of your presence. They don't trust aliens, and they're starting to organize. Some are even calling for your removal from this planet. Zyla's heart sank. She had feared this day might come, but hearing it from Dr. Mendez made it all too real. We're doing everything we can to protect you, Dr. Mendez continued. But I need you to understand the situation. There are powerful forces at play, and they won't back down easily. We need to be cautious. Zyla exchanged a glance with the other refugees. Iraq, the four-armed warrior, was visibly tense, his eyes narrowing as he clenched his fists. We didn't come here to be driven away, he growled, his voice filled with anger. Dr. Mendez held up a hand. I understand, but violence won't help. We need to prove to these people that you're not a threat. That's the only way we'll gain their trust. Zyla stood up, her posture strong. We've done nothing to harm anyone. Why do they fear us? We have nothing to offer except peace. Dr. Mendez sighed. It's not just about what you've done. It's about what they believe. Some people see your arrival as an invasion. They're afraid of what they don't understand. Zyla's mind raced. She understood fear, but it was hard to accept that their peaceful intentions were being met with suspicion. They couldn't just hide forever. They had to do something to prove that they belonged here. But what? We'll find a way to make them see the truth, Zyla said, her voice resolute. We won't run. We'll stand with you, and we'll show them that we are not their enemies. Dr. Mendez nodded, her expression softening. I believe in you, and we'll stand with you too. But we must be careful. The road ahead will not be easy. Zyla looked at the others. They were a small group, but together they had survived the worst. And together they would face whatever challenges Earth had in store for them. There was no turning back now. The future was uncertain, and the road ahead was filled with dangers. But Zyla was ready. She would fight not just for her survival, but for the future of her people, and perhaps for the future of Earth itself. The days grew colder as the weeks passed, and the atmosphere in the settlement began to shift. Zyla could feel it in the air. The tension was palpable. Despite Dr. Mendez's efforts to keep the peace, whispers of fear and suspicion continued to spread among the humans. News of the refugees' arrival had reached far beyond their small settlement, and now factions began to form. Some humans were still kind, offering help and support, but others were growing more hostile, convinced that the aliens were a threat. Zilla and the other refugees could sense the growing unease, and though they tried to stay focused on their work, it was impossible to ignore the undercurrent of fear. Everywhere they went, they felt eyes watching them, some filled with curiosity, others with distrust. Zilla had hoped that time would heal the divisions, but it seemed that the rift was only growing wider. One morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, Dr. Mendez called another meeting. Zilla gathered with the others, her heart heavy with uncertainty. What was happening now? How much longer could they stay in this fragile peace before it shattered completely? "I'd just received word that the situation is escalating," Dr. Mendez said, her voice tense. "There are now reports of organized protests in the nearby cities. Some groups are calling for the refugees to be removed, and others are demanding that we hand you over to the government for study." The room fell silent. The words hung heavily in the air, each one like a weight on Zilla's chest. She had feared this moment, but hearing it spoken aloud was different. The refugees had become pawns in a game that they didn't understand. "They want to study us," Torma muttered, his voice thick with disbelief. "What do they think we are? Experiments?" Dr. Mendez nodded grimly. "That's exactly what some people believe. They see you as a threat, something to be controlled, not as people. We have to be very careful." Zilla clenched her fists. She had seen this before, on other worlds. Fear turning strangers into enemies. And now it was happening to them. They had come to Earth seeking refuge, only to be met with suspicion and hostility. But she refused to let fear control them. She would fight for their place here, for their right to live in peace. "We won't let them take us," Zilla said firmly, her voice filled with resolve. "We came here to survive, not to be captured or experimented on." Dr. Mendez sighed and looked at her with sympathy. "I know, and I will do everything I can to protect you. But we have to be careful how we handle this. If we act out of fear, it could make things worse. We need to prove to the humans that we can be trusted." Zilla nodded. She understood. The more they fought back, the more they would be seen as enemies. But she couldn't just stand by and wait for things to get worse. They had to take action, and they had to do it in a way that wouldn't escalate the situation. The following days were tense. The refugees continued their work, helping around the settlement and learning more about human technology. Zilla spent time with Dr. Mendez, working on ways to communicate more effectively with the humans, trying to bridge the gap of misunderstanding. But despite their best efforts, the situation outside continued to worsen. One evening, as Zilla walked along the edge of the settlement, she heard shouting in the distance. She followed the sound, her heart racing. As she approached the clearing near the entrance, she saw a group of humans gathered, their faces twisted in anger. They were shouting at a group of refugees who had ventured outside to gather supplies. The words were harsh, filled with fear and hatred. "Go back to your own planet," one of the humans yelled. "You're not welcome here." Zilla's pulse quickened. She had seen this before, the way fear could twist people into something unrecognizable. The refugees were just trying to live, trying to survive. But the humans couldn't see that. They only saw what they feared. Without thinking, Zilla stepped forward, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd. "We don't want trouble," she said, her words clear and strong. "We only came here to survive, just like you. We mean no harm." The crowd grew silent, their eyes shifting between Zilla and the other refugees. Zilla could feel their hostility, but she refused to back down. She had to make them see that they weren't a threat. They were survivors, just like the humans. But then, one of the protesters stepped forward, his face red with anger. "You think you're better than us. You think you can just come here and take what's ours." Zilla's heart raced. She knew she had to be careful. This wasn't just about survival. It was about proving to these humans that they weren't the enemy. She took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "No, we don't think we're better," she said softly. We're not here to take anything from you. We just want to live in peace. We want to help, not hurt." The protester hesitated, his anger faltering as he met Zyla's calm gaze. There was a long silence, and for a moment, Zyla dared to hope that they could find common ground. But the tension was still there, thick in the air. The crowd wasn't convinced, not yet. Then, just as Zyla thought the situation would escalate, Dr. Mendez arrived, flanked by a few other humans from the settlement. She stepped forward, her voice firm but compassionate. "These people are under my protection," Dr. Mendez said, her presence commanding attention. "I will not stand by and let them be treated like this. We've taken them in, and we will treat them as equals. I will make sure of it." The protesters grumbled, but the arrival of Dr. Mendez shifted the atmosphere. The anger seemed to fade, replaced by uncertainty. The humans didn't know what to make of Dr. Mendez's resolve, and slowly the crowd began to disperse. As the tension eased, Zyla let out a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. It wasn't a victory, but it was a small step in the right direction. She knew the battle wasn't over, but she also knew that with each day, they were proving that they belonged here. And she would fight for that right, no matter what. The days seemed to stretch endlessly as the tension in the settlement continued to rise. The protests, though they had quieted for a brief moment, began to flare up once again, this time with more intensity. News of the refugees' presence had spread far beyond the small town, and the fear of the unknown had fueled anger in many parts of the region. For every person who offered kindness and compassion, there seemed to be two others who viewed the refugees with suspicion or outright hostility. Zyla spent most of her days helping where she could, whether it was fixing machinery, gathering supplies, or working on communication systems with Dr. Mendez. But she could feel the weight of the growing tension pressing down on her shoulders. She had hoped for peace, but it seemed like it was slipping further away with each passing day. She often wandered through the settlement in the quiet of the early morning, trying to clear her mind. The humans were becoming more divided by the day, and Zyla knew that her people could never hope to survive in a place so fractured. She needed a way to bring them together, some common ground that would shift the balance. One morning, as she was walking through the settlement, Zyla saw something unusual. A group of human children was gathered near the refugee camp, watching the aliens work. They were curious, but their parents kept a watchful eye, not allowing them to get too close. Zyla watched for a moment before walking over to the group of children. She had always found their curiosity to be a bright spot in an otherwise dark situation. "Hello," she said softly, offering a warm smile. The children looked up, startled, but none of them ran away. Zyla crouched down to their level, careful not to intimidate them. "I'm Zyla," she said gently. "Would you like to help us with something?" One of the children, a young boy with wide eyes, hesitated before stepping forward. "What do you need help with?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. Zyla smiled, feeling a flicker of hope. "We're working on repairing some of the old equipment. If you could help us gather the tools, we could teach you how to use them. You could learn a lot." The boy's face lit up. "I know a little about machines," he said, clearly excited. The other children quickly gathered around, eager to join in. Zyla guided them through the task, showing them how to sort the parts and handle the tools with care. As they worked together, she realized that this small moment, this simple act of kindness, could be the key to bridging the gap. If the children could see the refugees as people with skills and knowledge, not threats, it might change their parents' minds as well. Later that evening, after the children had returned to their families, Zyla walked over to Dr. Mendez. "I think we need to focus on the younger generation," she said, her voice filled with determination. "The adults are too set in their ways, but the children, they're still learning. If we can show them that we're not so different, we can change their minds." Dr. Mendez looked thoughtful. "You might be right. The children are our best hope for the future. They aren't burdened by the fear that the adults carry. Maybe we can use that to our advantage." Zyla nodded, feeling a sense of purpose rising within her. This was just the beginning, but she knew it could make a difference. Over the next few days, she worked with the other refugees to create small workshops for the children, teaching them about their technology, their culture, and how they could work together. They learned how to repair simple machines, how to mix different resources, and even how to play alien games. Slowly, the human children began to open up, seeing the refugees as teachers, friends, and even role models. As the workshops continued, something amazing began to happen. The parents, who had once been so wary, began to see the bond forming between their children and the refugees. At first, it was small gestures, a smile exchanged between a child and a refugee, a hand offered to help carry tools. But over time, these gestures began to build into something much more powerful: understanding. One evening, a group of parents arrived at the settlement, cautiously approaching the refugee camp. Zyla and Dr. Mendez watched from a distance as the group of humans gathered near the edge of the camp. They were no longer shouting, no longer demanding that the refugees leave. Instead, they were watching the children, who were playing with the alien-made toys, laughing and talking in a mixture of languages. Zyla stepped forward, her heart racing. She had no idea what would happen next, but she knew that this was a moment they couldn't afford to miss. "I see my son is happy," one of the parents said, his voice quiet but sincere. "He's learning from you. And I don't think that's such a bad thing." Another parent nodded. "Our children have been talking about your people, asking questions. They don't see you as different anymore." Zyla's heart swelled with hope. "That's the point," she said. "We're not so different. We all want the same thing: to live, to learn, and to help each other." The parents exchanged glances, and for the first time, Zyla saw something new in their eyes. It wasn't fear, it was understanding. That night, after the parents had left, Zyla sat with Dr. Mendez by the fire. The warmth of the flames seemed to reflect the warmth growing between the humans and the refugees. "This is just the beginning," Zyla said softly. "But I think we can do it. We can show them who we really are. Not as strangers, not as threats, but as friends." Dr. Mendez smiled, her eyes filled with pride. "You're right. The future belongs to those who are willing to change. And I think, together, we can help both humans and aliens find that future." Zyla nodded, knowing that the hard work was far from over. But for the first time, she felt that the gap between them could truly be bridged. The children had started the spark, and now it was up to everyone to carry it forward. The day had come when the small town, once filled with fear and uncertainty, began to change. The tension that had plagued the settlement for so long was beginning to ebb, replaced by a growing sense of community. It hadn't been easy, but the efforts of both the human and alien refugees had started to bear fruit. And it was all thanks to the children, their open minds, their willingness to accept, and their simple belief in the goodness of others. Zyla stood on the edge of the settlement, looking out over the land. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange as the sun began to set. It had been a long journey, but they had finally made it to a point where there was hope, a real, lasting hope. The workshops for the children had continued, and they had grown in both size and importance. The human parents, once hesitant and afraid, had now become active participants, learning alongside their children. Together, they worked with the refugees to repair the damaged equipment, build new structures, and even improve the old communication systems. It was clear that the two groups were learning from each other, not just in terms of technology, but in understanding. Zyla turned to see Dr. Mendez walking toward her, a warm smile on her face. "You did it," she said softly. "You brought them together." Zyla smiled, though her heart was still heavy with the weight of all that had happened. It wasn't just me. It was the children, the parents, the refugees. It was everyone. We all had to make the choice to change. Dr. Mendez nodded in agreement. The hardest part is always taking that first step. But once you do, you realize that change is possible. As they stood together, watching the humans and aliens work side by side, Zyla couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. There had been moments when she had thought this day would never come, when it felt like the divide between them would never be bridged. But now, as she watched the children playing and laughing, and the adults exchanging stories, she realized how far they had come. In the distance, a group of human farmers approached the settlement. Zyla had seen them before, unsure, wary, and distant. But today they walked with purpose, their faces no longer filled with anger. Instead, they carried tools, baskets of supplies, and even small gifts for the refugees. They had come to help, just as the refugees had helped them. One of the farmers, an older man with kind eyes, approached Zyla and Dr. Mendez. "I've been thinking a lot about what's happened here," he said quietly. "At first I thought you were all just strangers, people to be feared. But I've seen what's been happening. How you've worked with our children, how you've shared your knowledge, your resources, and I can't deny it anymore. We need each other." Zyla felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She had hoped for this, but hearing the words made it real. "We do need each other," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. "We may be different, but at the core, we all want the same things: to survive, to live peacefully, and to make the world a better place." The farmer nodded, his face softening. "I've been blind, but I see it now. We all have something to offer, and I want to do my part." As the evening fell, the settlement was filled with a sense of warmth and unity. The once divided community had come together in a way that none of them had ever imagined. There were no more angry protests, no more fear. Instead, there was cooperation, an unspoken understanding that they were all in this together. Zyla and Dr. Mendez watched as the townspeople gathered around the fire, sharing stories, food, and laughter. The refugees, once considered outcasts, were now seen as equals, as members of the community. It was a sight that Zyla would never forget. "This is just the beginning," Zyla said, her voice filled with hope. "We've taken the first step, but we still have so much to learn from each other." Dr. Mendez smiled, her eyes reflecting the same hope. "And we will. Together." As the night wore on, Zyla felt a deep sense of peace settle within her. The journey had been long, but the rewards were worth it. She had witnessed the power of kindness, of understanding, and of the willingness to change. In the end, it was not their differences that defined them, but their shared humanity. And as the stars began to twinkle in the sky above, Zyla knew that they had created something beautiful, a new beginning for both humans and refugees alike. The future, once uncertain, now seemed full of promise. They had built a bridge between worlds, and nothing could tear it down. Together, they would face whatever challenges came their way, united in their strength, their compassion, and their hope for a better tomorrow.